Guys, in this video, we talk about essay writing and we'll see the common challenges or the common mistakes that normally students make when it comes to essay writing. See, in fact, many students actually believe that it's actually the test of knowledge, right? But when it comes to the essay, the real challenge is not about knowledge. It is about how you're thinking and how you're organizing your thoughts and how you build your argument and how you stick to that argument and how you're going to prove that argument and how coherently you take the examiner from one idea to another, how you are connecting, what are the connecting words you are using, what are the interlinkages, what are the examples that you are given. See, why I said knowledge is not important is because, see, this is something which you will be already having, right? You have done with your general studies, you have cleared the prelims, right? And you are done with current affairs, so you have the current affair knowledge. You have done with one optional and you have studied ethics and you are reading newspaper every day and you have gone through a lot of reports, a lot of examples, a lot of data, a lot of quotes. So there is no challenge that I think you will face with respect to knowledge. So when it comes to essay, it's all about how you organize your thoughts, how you present your argument, and how you proceed with that further. I can tell you two students, they may have the same knowledge. In fact, 90% of the students who's writing the mains will have the same knowledge because you read the similar current affairs, you read the similar standard textbooks, and you mostly attend the similar classes, and you study for almost similar number of hours also. So the knowledge that you have and the facts that you know will be 90% same, or for 90% of the people, it's very close. But you can, if you take two students, one may score very high mark, maybe in essay, maybe you'll be getting 125, 145. The other person may be having the same knowledge, but you'll be getting around 80 or 90. One person who's scoring higher, his essay may be better structured, better argued, and better explained, and better presented, and there is connection. So let's try to understand the seven major mistakes that you normally make. So once you understood, and if you can rectify that mistakes at this point itself, you will be doing very good when it comes to essay, and this is going to be one of the most important deciding factor. Okay, so the first point, no single argument which is running through the essay. This is probably the biggest problem. Many students, I evaluate papers of my MTs, personally I evaluate papers. So you just write essay like a stretched GS answer, right? You touch multiple dimensions, you follow a pastel approach, you talk about social dimension, you talk about political dimension, economic dimension, ethical dimension, legal, environmental, technological. But when it comes to the essay, it does not have one central argument. You talk about one and then you skip to the other, you skip to the other. So examiner finishes reading and still he actually don't understand what exactly was the writer trying to say, because you touched all these dimensions. You have just presented a lot of stuff in that, right? There is no single argument which is going throughout the essay. So before writing, you should be having very clear idea. You should identify the core essence of the topic and try to reduce it to one sentence and ask yourself, what is my central stand? What is the point that I'm going to argue? And then every paragraph should serve that stand. You might be talking about different dimension, you talk about different examples, you bring in different dimensions, but still that one central stand that should be reflected and that should run throughout your essay. For example, let's say the essay is talking about character is destiny, right? So before writing, you should mentally decide what you're trying to establish. Maybe your core idea will be long-term outcomes of individuals, institutions, and nations are ultimately shaped by the repeated patterns of conduct and values. So that's what you need to present. Now, every example and every paragraph and every dimension, every aspect of life that you're writing should connect back to the central argument that you're presenting. And without that, the essay becomes collection of disconnected points. So examiner read different dimensions and different points, and he's actually deviated from the main idea that you want to convey. Right at the end, he is not able to understand what's your main point in the essay. So that is something which need to be very clear. So you need to have the stand and stick to that stand, that core argument, the essence of the essay in each of the dimensions you write, examples you write, the paragraph that you write. So stick to that, and properly it has to be connected. Then another mistake that I have seen is to talk about so much of example and we be giving very little depth in the answer. The example is only to emphasize or to convince one particular point or to prove that point. This is a very important point that you need to understand. Don't just dump examples just because a lot of examples. I think you memorize 15, 10, 20 examples, and you try to reproduce these in some way or the other. You just want to insert as much as possible. One paragraph you may talk about Gandhi, and next paragraph that may talk about Russia-Ukraine war, and then another paragraph you talk about another example that you have learned related to AI. Then you may be talking about Buddha. Then you may be talking about something related to climate change. Then you talk something related to Supreme Court cases or something. So see, every example gets only one line, right? So that is basically creating breadth without depth. But if you look at the high scoring essays, that does not necessarily need large number of examples. You have made a point to prove that you need to give example, right? You need to substantiate that point. So you may only have to use 3 or 4 powerful example with depth. You should develop them properly. That's the main idea. For every important example, you can explain if you have given what happened, why did it happen, even case law also. Briefly, you can mention that. How does it support your argument, right? The example that you have given, how does substantiating your argument and what larger lesson does that example reveal? And why is it relevant to the essay topic? Rather than dumping all the examples that you have learned, you get a question on X, you write all these examples. Why also the same examples that you have learned? Your objective is just to dump those examples that you have learned. In that case, you're not going to do very good. So that is why essay writing is also very important. Practice one essay in 2 weeks, or at least once in a month. If you practice, it will do good. You sit with your mentor and understand if this is your problem, you'll have to correct it. So these two are very important. See, in fact, that is a difference between simply mentioning an example and actually using an example. Suppose the same example, which will take, you are talking about, you're writing an essay on character as destiny. You may use the evolution of India's response to terrorism. So you'll simply talk about, Parliament attack or Pahalgam attack or Operation Sindoor. That does not establish anything if you simply explain all these attacks. You must have to explain how policy behaviors evolved after each of these and what values or strategic character this actually reflect, and how repeated choices is basically shaping the outcomes. Then the examiner will understand, that example which you have given, or the context or the relevance of that example, not just by merely giving the example, right? It's not just about the what. The examiner should understand the so what. I hope you got the point. Now, the third one, the transitions. You may make mechanical transition without proper connectors. A lot of essays, are connected using words like moreover, furthermore, similarly, however, in addition. But these are, just grammatical connectors. They're not the real transitions, right? So I always talk about the structure words, very important words, the transitions, the connectors that you need. So a strong transition will tell the examiner why the next paragraph is logically follows from the previous one. The idea, the argument that you have mentioned in the previous paragraph, how is it logically connected with the next one? So suppose one paragraph is discussing like your Russia-Ukraine war, and the next is talking about artificial intelligence. Simply writing moreover AI is also transforming society does not going to create any coherence or connection, or not reflecting any proper transition. So you basically have to bridge this. You need a bridge, you need a connector. Bridge is a connector. So you need to ask yourself, even before you starting every new paragraph, see, why does this paragraph follow the previous paragraph? And the answer to that question should become your transition sentence. You can say, for example, uh, uh, while geopolitical conflict demonstrate how national character shapes collective choices, the same question of responsibility become equally significant when technological power shift from states to algorithms and corporations. Corporations. So now the examiner will understand why you moved from geopolitics to technology. This is the real transition. I hope you got it. So the connectors, the transition need to be very clear. It should logically follow the previous paragraph. So that now the essay should feel like one argument you have given and flowing forward, and not several answers stitched together, right? It's not that several arguments simply are, argued together. So it's all are connected, all are stitched together in a proper framework. Next is sudden change in writing styles. Many essays you start beautifully. There is a story, there is a philosophical hook, and there is a reflective tone. And suddenly, After 2 pages, the essay become like point one, point two, social dimension, political dimension, economic dimension, environmental direction, dimension. So the essay now changed from a narrative into checklist. Just because someone have told you need to cover these dimension, you started beautifully in a proper flow, but then it completely changed because you are forced to cover different dimension. That's actually destroying the flow that you have created, right? So essay writing require a consistent narrative style, a smooth flow, and it could be analytical. You can be analytical. You can use facts. You can use stories, but you need to blend of narration and analysis throughout the essay. It's not that you should not deviate, and there is nothing like you have to cover each of this in one way or the other. Somehow you need to cover these dimensions. That approach is going to be not working good, right? So if you begin with a reflective style, do not completely abandon it in the midway. The essay should feel like the same person is thinking, from beginning to end. Otherwise, you start in one way and, in between, just that you need to add all these points. Now you change things. So 1,000 or 2,000, 1,200 word essay that should sustain one voice. One person is writing, similar beginning, similar narration, similar argument. That's how it should be. Next point, fifth mistake, fragmented, not like paragraph, right? This is a bigger problem again. One or two line paragraphs, right? It's not that's what I mean by fragmented paragraph. So student introduce an idea and immediately abandon that, and then they start another idea, then you write another idea. So that makes the essay looks like your class notes. You're just preparing the notes. That is not a proper write-up, right? And essay, the paragraph in the essay that has to develop an argument. So the structure could be you make a claim and you can explain that, you can give an example, and you can talk about implication. So this much should be there in the paragraph. It's not that structured, scattered, right? It's not that fragmented also. See, when I say claim, what do you mean by that? You state an idea and then you explain what you mean in that. And then you give an example. You're substantiating that. You are giving evidence from history or contemporary events or current affairs that you have learned, or the examples that you have mugged up, or even from your experience. And then implication. Explain why this matters for the larger essay. For example, let's say your claimers, I'll give you an example. Institutions ultimately reflect the character of people operating them. Then explain how rules alone cannot ensure ethical administration. Then you can use example of institutional integrity of it or institutional failure. And finally, you can connect it to the larger idea that character influences destiny. Now the paragraph has the depth. So just don't simply write institutions depend on character and then you move to the next paragraph. What is there? It is, nothing. So unpack the idea. Okay, next mistake, quotations you use as decoration. Someone have told you mug up and use it somewhere, you use it. Many aspirants, they collect quotation because they are told quotations improve essay. Nothing like that. And you start dropping all these quotations that you have learned everywhere you feel like. Gandhi said this, Aristotle said this, Vivekananda told this. Just because you know this doesn't mean you have to write it everywhere. Einstein said this, but you never explain the quotation also, right? So the quotation is going to be useful only when it strengthens your argument, only if you have a context. If you are quoting Gandhi for environment, you need to have first develop the context for that environment and then talk about that need and greed and sustainable development, and then validate that with your quotes or explain with that. If you are using quotation, you'll have to explain what does it mean, why it is relevant, and how does it connect to your argument. Not simply according to Gandhi or according to Aristotle. So it won't work. So the examiner can easily identify when a quotation has been memorized and inserted mechanically and when it is coming logically in a flow. So don't read quotations like decorations. Just simply memorizing and quoting, that is not going to give you anything. Treat them as evidence or interpretation, just like the way you use examples. I can give you an example. If you use character as destiny as a quote, then do not simply write it and move forward. You have to explain that destiny here does not imply fatalism. Rather, you will have repeated choices, habits, and values that gradually shape the long-term outcomes. Now, this quotation, if you see, that is having some kind of analytical value. It is not a decorative kind of setup. So the same principle that is going to be applicable to Gandhi or the thinkers also. Don't just drop the thinkers, their names, according to Gandhi, according to Ambedkar, according to Aristotle. No, according to Gandhi, Vivekananda. You have to use their ideas properly, explain that also if you are using it. Otherwise, don't use it. Now, the last one, again, very important one, because this is a conclusion. You give a generic conclusion. This is another major problem. Students write conclusion like India must balance tradition with modernity, or we must move together towards sustainable development, or you talk about only through collective effort we can build better future. These lines can fit almost in any essay. That means they are not really conclusions. The conclusion must be specific to the one which you are writing, the one which is asked, right? It should not simply summarize everything also. It should not be something which is ready made and you are just writing over there. It should synthesize the argument which is given. There is a difference when it comes to summary and synthesis. Summary means you're just repeating what you said, summarizing. That is one way of writing the conclusion, but in your optional paper, not in your essay, not in your GS. GS at least has to be way forward. When I say synthesis means you'll bring different arguments together and produce a larger insight. Suppose throughout the essay, you have used examples from individuals, institutions, nations, history, technology. Then your conclusion should connect all these levels and show what they collectively prove. I'll give you an example. Whether in a person, an institution, or nation, destiny rarely emerges from one dramatic moment. It is accumulated through repeated choices. Character therefore becomes destiny, not because the future is predetermined, but because habits gradually narrow or expand the range of futures available to us. So that conclusion belongs to the topic which you have attempted. So it cannot simply be pasted into another essay, right? So that is how the logical connection should be there. And that is what you should be aiming for. Now, one more major problem that I've seen is I've done with 7. Let me talk about one more. There is no counter argument. A good essay should not only completely one-sided. UPSC reward balanced and multidimensional thinking. Suppose the topic is happiness is a journey, not a destination. Then you may strongly agree, but still acknowledge the counter. For example, goals and achievements can provide direction, motivation, meaning, closure, social progress. So destinations also matter. Then you can return to your central core argument. However, if happiness is postponed entirely until achievement, human life becomes permanently deferred. So that shows the real maturity and that will be rewarded. So a counter argument that doesn't mean abandoning your original stand, right? You are just proposing the opposite side also. You're saying that this view is also there. I'm respecting that, but this is mine. So the structure is state your argument, acknowledge the counter view, and examine its validity, and return to your original stand in more mature form. This is what balanced thinking looks like. So for a future bureaucrat, this kind of balance is very extremely important, very much important, and that's why this will be rewarded. Right now, let me give you an idea about an average essay and a high scoring essay. I've seen multiple essays and so many, at least thousands of essays I've evaluated from different mentees. So see, average essay, they use many examples. High scoring essay use very few examples, but explain them deeply. The depth matters. Average essay I've seen, they list facts from across dimension, right? But high scoring essay build and defend an argument. Average essay ends with a generic statement. High scoring essay synthesizes the argument, synthesizes the argument. And average essay, they use like general keywords like moreover, furthermore, however, as transitions. But a high scoring essay use logical transition sentences between paragraphs. Average essay is one sided, but high scoring essay that contain nuances and the counter arguments. Average essay just demonstrate knowledge, just put everything you know in the paper, just use quotation, just use examples, dumping of everything you know. But a high scoring essay demonstrate the organized thought. That's the difference. That's a simple difference. So if I want to give you a simple essay framework, see, before writing your next essay, next time, even when you're practicing, just follow this process. First, decode the topic and ask yourself, what is the topic actually saying? Or what is it asking? Identify the core essence in 3 to 5 words and then write one sentence explaining your stand on the core idea, essence. And that sentence is your internal compass. That should be reflected in each and every paragraph that you're writing. Now build the argument means do not immediately list all the dimension. Again, you have to ask yourself, what is going to be my first argument? What naturally follows from it? And what is the next level? What is a contradiction? What is a counter view? Where should the essay ultimately arrive? So that is actually producing that flow. Now, then when you're selecting example, first you have to ask yourself which example is best to prove my argument, not about how many examples I'm going to dump. Which is best for this context? I use only the best. I don't want to go with 3, 4, 5 examples, just the best for that particular argument. If 3 powerful examples can be better than 10 superficial ones, that's much better. For every example that you are giving, also explain what, why, how, and so what. And then build the paragraph properly. Every major paragraph should ideally contain your claim, your explanation, your example, and your implication. That prevent not like writing in your essay. Otherwise, your essay looks like class notes. Always remember, create logical transitions between paragraphs. Why am I moving here now? Ask yourself before you make another argument, and convert that into a sentence, and that becomes your transition. Always add counter arguments, right? See, identify 1 or 2 places where the opposite position has some merit, and then acknowledge that, analyze that. Then again, return to your main stand. That give your essay kind of intellectual blend and maturity, right? And the topic specific conclusion, very important. Do not prepare just one universal conclusion and that is going to fit in anywhere. The conclusion has to emerge from the essay. So you have to bring together your central stand, your main example, your counter view, your final insight. So the conclusion should make the examiner feel that the entire essay has reached somewhere. Okay, so always remember this when I'm talking about UPSC essay, it's not about showing the examiner everything you know just by dumping a lot of quotation or putting a lot of thinkers or giving a lot of examples, right? It's not just like that. It's about you will have to show the examiner how you think with what you already know, how you present it. Knowledge that you have is just the raw material. The structure that you convert, you have, or you will present. That's what more important. So analyze the depth, and give the depth in your examples. Transitions are very important. Counter arguments are very important. Examples give you that credibility, right? And proper conclusion. Synthesis, give it a strong conclusion. So these are points that you need to keep in mind before your next essay. Check all these 7 things. Do I have a central argument? That's the first point. Am I explaining examples instead of dumping example? The best examples I want. Are my transitions logical? Is my narrative consistent? Are my paragraphs properly developed? Whether the quotations are actually contributing to the argument? Is my conclusion is specific to the question which is asked? And finally, have I acknowledged the other side also, the counter view? If you can correct these mistakes consistently, I can guarantee you your essay will stop looking like a stretched GS answer and it will start reading like a coherent, mature, and well-argued piece of writing. And that's what give you that 125 to 145 mark. So I hope you'll do that, and I see you later. If you're looking for any essay, ethics, or GS mentorship program, talk to our team, join the prelims or mains companion. I see you there. Thank you.